Since the new year has arrived and we can look back on the entirety of 2021, I figure it's a good time to talk about the top 5 best moments we got from Jujutsu Kaisen in the last year. Before we get into that, I of course have to mention that if you haven't already, you should definitely be sure to subscribe. Our new subscriber goal is hitting 5,000 subscribers. Whenever we manage to do that, I'm going to do a 24-hour live stream. That should be something whenever it happens. So definitely be sure to subscribe so we can get onto that fun thing at some point. But with that out of the way, let's get on with the video. Starting off in 5th place, we have Yuta's return from chapter 137. Yuta, of course, is the main character of the one-shot where Jujutsu Kaisen got its start, Volume 0. If it weren't for Yuta and his story in Volume 0, Jujutsu Kaisen as a whole wouldn't exist. While Yuta has kind of been pushed into the background since the start of the series with Yuji as the main character for the series, his return has been teased for quite some time, and needless to say, we the fans were eagerly awaiting to see his return. After Gojo being sealed and all of the other chaos that came from the Shibuya incident, we knew it was inevitable for him to come back into the main story. And in chapter 137, he finally did. It's very interesting and raised a lot of questions seeing Yuta come back in the present. It's been about a year since Volume 0 ended in terms of inside the story, and a lot has happened in that time. A lot that we really haven't seen. We knew that Yuta was over in Africa. He was presumably training with how to use his curse technique, and we didn't know what exactly was going to change with him now that Rika was apparently gone. However, we got a lot of very interesting information with his return, the biggest one being that Rika is apparently back again, and we have the setup for his apparent mission to track down and kill Yuji for supposedly killing tons of people and taking Inumaki's arm during the Shibuya incident. Now, of course, this ended up being a ruse on his part. However, it was very cool to see Yuta come back with a new look, maybe a new Rika, and get some very interesting setup for the story post-Shibuya incident. In the number 4 spot, I have Chozo's speech on the role of an older brother from chapter 142. Prior to this chapter, Chozo was one of those characters that I thought was pretty cool, had an interesting design, had cool powers, but I didn't think too much of him as a character. It was just kind of there. But with some of the developments that he got after his fight with Yuji, seemingly being brainwashed into thinking that Yuji was his brother, and then finding out that actually maybe they are related, we finally got what I consider to be the biggest and best moment for Chozo's character up until this point. In his battle against Naoya, he encounters someone who is a terrible brother and has no respect for his older siblings, despite all the things that they do for him actively or unintentionally. And Chozo just can't let that stand. He gives what I consider to be one of the best speeches in the series about the role of an older brother, how even through their successes and their failures, they pave the way for their younger siblings and show them the path. Of course, Chozo is someone who has lost his younger brothers because of his most recently found youngest brother. So it's a very interesting dynamic there for Chozo. And this speech put him several tiers higher in terms of my favorite characters. I would maybe go so far as to say he's even in my top 10 now. I'm very much hoping that he does not die in the coming arcs, even though it seems like Chozo's got some pretty big death flags waving over his head. Hopefully, the future can still be bright for our blood-bending older brother. In 3rd place, I have Higuruma's backstory from chapter 159. This one is kind of cheating because it's supposed to be a moment, whereas, well, the number 3 spot is basically the entirety of chapter 159. I would go so far as to say that it is one of the best chapters in the series. It's definitely a 10 out of 10, and that's kind of amazing considering it is a chapter that introduces a new character. Normally, a lot of the best chapters in a series, notably the best chapters in Jujutsu, are usually playing off of established characters, things that have already been set up about them, and a lot of the times are usually payoff. I consider chapter 132 to be the best chapter in the series because it's the payoff for the entire dynamic created between Yuji and Mahito since basically 100 chapters prior. But this chapter somehow manages to get into that top tier of chapters just through the introduction of Higuruma, who's a completely new character. Gege establishes him as someone who is fighting a losing battle. He's fighting against the entirety of the Japanese legal system, and despite the odds, he still always presses onwards, but eventually he reaches his breaking point and he snaps. And frankly, a man who is fighting for justice in an unjust system is a pretty compelling character already, and it creates a lot of opportunities for some pretty great character interactions, especially considering we have quite a few conflicted characters who've done things that they hold a lot of guilt in their hearts for. And well, I feel like certain moments that come up after this chapter ended up being so good because chapter 159 set up Higuruma's character so well, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But anyway, yeah, Higuruma's introduction is perhaps the strongest of any character in the series, and as a result, it is one of the strongest chapters that we've gotten in the entire series, certainly one of the best that we got in the last year. Before we get on to the top two, I'd like to take this opportunity to give a shout out to my wonderful patrons. Special thanks to Neo, Dijon Redden, Anthony Chavez, Honey Mustard, K-God, Chris Redfield, Rat, Ryzen 4K, Artist, Wave of Manga, Chuck's Feed and Seed, Jakester Easy, and Play Free Labs. Thank you all very much for supporting me on Patreon. I greatly appreciate it, and if you too want to get a shout out at some point during videos, or access to reviews for The Boxer, and very soon, access to reviews for One Piece, you can always become a patron as well. There's a link to my Patreon down in the description. In the number 2 spot, we have Maki becoming complete in chapter 149. I know a lot of people have had issues with how quickly this moment happened, but me personally, I couldn't care less. Out of all the moments we got this year, last year I guess, this moment was probably the one that made me the most hyped out of all of them. We've, pretty much ever since Volume 0, established that the Zenin clan are god-awful, and that for her entire life, Maki has been treated like shit by them. And then we see more and more examples of that as the series goes on. We establish her relationship with Mai and how that kind of soured in large part because of their upbringing in the Zenin clan. We meet other characters from the Zenin clan who were affected by how awful they were, like Toji. We get to meet more members of the Zenin clan who suck, like Naoya. And eventually, we meet Maki's father, Ogi, who is probably the embodiment of just how awful they are. He's essentially the terrible, systemic, generational evil of the Zenin clan, and he ends up being the straw that breaks the camel's back. He gravely injures both Maki and Mai, throws them in a pit of curses to die, and leaves talking about how they are both failures who've been a stain on his life. And eventually this forces Mai to sacrifice her own life and allow Maki to finally have a complete heavenly restriction that is not inhibited by her soul being split with herself and Mai. Now, after all of this build-up for how god-awful the Zenin clan are, Maki finally becomes strong enough to take her revenge on them. And the start of her revenge is absolutely glorious. Ogi remembering the fear he had of Toji, who, by the way, was basically introduced in one respect to establish this eventual power-up for Maki, and then him getting speed blitzed by Maki as Maki gets ready to start the Zenin massacre. This was one of the most exciting and thrilling moments we got out of any chapter in the last year, and I'm very interested in seeing where Maki is going to go from here now that she's completed her vengeance against the Zenin clan. I guess we'll just have to wait around and find out. Now then, what I consider to be the best moment we got in 2021 from Jujutsu Kaisen, Yuji's guilt in chapter 165. When Higuruma was introduced as a man who was seeking justice, my first thought was, Yuji is a person who a lot of people want to bring to justice. Many people blame him for Sukuna's rampage during the Shibuya incident. And that list of people includes Yuji himself. So what will happen when Yuji and Higuruma eventually meet? Well, we get a pretty good fight, and then we get the wonderful narrative opportunities that come from Higuruma's domain expansion, Forced Suicide Punishment, in which you start playing a game of Ace Attorney. Now, when Yuji gets a chance to retry his case in Higuruma's court of law and get cursed energy usage back in his fight, he is charged with mass murder during the Shibuya incident, and instead of trying to plead his case, try to get a not guilty verdict so that he doesn't have to worry about not having cursed energy anymore, he instead flat out says, yeah, I killed those people, I'm not going to try and deny it, and ends up in a worse situation than he already was, through his own fault. Now, it's extremely telling that Yuji is willing to essentially forfeit a chance at victory in a mission because he is not willing to say in his mind that he is not responsible for an atrocity that he committed. He feels too much guilt in his heart for Sukuna's rampage to lie and say that he's not responsible for killing all of those innocent people, even if it's to the detriment of himself and the others that he's working with in the culling game. This opportunity, of course, was made possible because of Higuruma and the setup for his character in chapter 159, and this chapter is basically the payoff for one of the best chapters we've gotten in a while. I was very worried after the Shibuya incident that we were going to kind of push Yuji's character development to the side, Yuji sort of being consumed with guilt, losing his will to live, not wanting to put other people in danger. I was concerned as he met back up with Megumi and the others from Jujutsu Tech that we were going to kind of ignore that a little bit. And I'm very glad that in this moment, Gege decided to put Yuji's character development to the forefront once again. No, we are not going to be forgetting about this. This is not going on the back burner. This is still very important. Yuji is still a developing character. He is kind of in a stage right now where he can go in various other directions. He could regress further into thinking he deserves to die, or someone could perhaps kind of reach out a hand to him and lead him back towards the light. Who knows where we're going to go from there, but needless to say, this moment made me very excited for the future of Yuji's character. Well, with that, that's all I've got to say for today's video. What were your favorite moments we got in 2021 for Jujutsu Kaisen? Please be sure to let me know down in the comments. I'm very interested in seeing what you guys have to say. But yeah, if you enjoyed, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that notification bell so you don't miss any of my uploads. I do Jujutsu Kaisen chapter reactions and reviews every week that we get a new chapter. If you enjoyed discussing Jujutsu Kaisen with other people, or you just enjoy the content I produce on this channel, I highly suggest you check out my Discord server. I have linked to that down in the description. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys around. Take care.